In the deadly light rail stabbing case.
The man accused of killing Ukrainian refugee Iryna Zarutska was found incapable to proceed in court by a state psychiatric hospital.
The Carlos Brown Jr. faces state and federal charges in the stabbing of Iryna Zarutska on Charlotte's light rail last August. WBTV investigative reporter David Hodges joining us from the newsroom to break down this latest development in this case. David.
Yeah, Siobhan, a motion filed by Brown's attorney in court yesterday is what revealed this new information regarding the mental health evaluation. It does not mean this case is dead or over, but likely just means it's delayed. According to a motion filed on Tuesday, DeCarlos Brown Jr. was evaluated at Central Regional Hospital, and a report from December 29, 2025 determined he was incapable of proceeding. This does not mean he's incompetent to stand trial. A judge still has to decide whether to accept those findings, and even if they do, there's every expectation that there would be a process to restore Brown to competency. I spoke with the attorney for the Zarutska family about the court filing, and she told me this was not a surprise at all and is just the justice system playing out the way it's supposed to.
This was a motion that's not unexpected. DeCarlos Brown Jr. is still in federal custody, so we didn't expect the Rule 24 hearing in state court to happen at the end of the month because he is in federal custody, still undergoing the psychiatric capacity evaluation by the federal investigators.
Yeah, coming up at 6, I'm breaking down what does make this a little different is that Brown is in federal custody in Chicago right now. That's straight ahead at 6 right here on WBTV. John?
All right,
I know you'll like to watch the full story, but please try and go back and click the subscribe button to this channel. And please don't forget to like, share, and turn on your notification bell to notify you when I drop any crime scene to this platform, and comment where you're watching from, and what time is it over there. Thank you. Let's continue. Go back and subscribe, because this is the only way you can help me grow. Thank you for subscribing, so let's get to the bottom of the case. The train was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that makes you feel safe without even thinking about it. Passengers sat scattered across the carriage, some lost in their phones, others staring blankly out the windows as the Charlotte skyline slipped past in silence. It was just another routine ride on the Lynx Blue Line. Just another normal night. Until it wasn't. Because somewhere between those ordinary moments, between the soft hum of the train and the flicker of passing lights, something shifted. A man was watching. No one noticed him at first. He didn't look like danger. He didn't announce himself. He didn't make a sound. But what was happening inside his mind was something no one else on that train could see. And in just a few seconds, everything would change. One young woman, 23 years old, far from home, trying to build a better life, would find herself trapped in a nightmare she never saw coming. There would be no warning, no time to escape, only fear. Not the kind of fear that freezes you, that makes your body curl in on itself, that leaves you hoping someone, anyone, will step in before it's too late. But by the time people realized what was happening, it already was. Because this wasn't just a random act of violence. This was the result of something much deeper. A story that began long before that train ride. A story filled with warning signs, missed chances, and a man slowly losing his grip on reality. A story that raises one terrifying question. Could this have been stopped? Or was this tragedy always waiting for the right moment to unfold? The question lingered long after the train had been cleared, long after the flashing lights faded into the distance, and long after the city tried to move on. Could this have been stopped? And to understand what happened on that train, you have to go back, before the screams, before the panic, before that night in August 2025. You have to step into a different kind of silence, the kind that surrounds a life slowly unraveling. DeCarlos Brown Jr. didn't wake up one day and become a headline. There was no single moment where everything snapped into place. No sudden transformation from ordinary man to accused killer. Instead, his story was quieter, slower, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. And for a long time, no one was really looking closely enough. By early 2024, there were already signs, clear ones. Police records would later show that authorities had multiple interactions with him. Welfare checks, calls that didn't quite make sense, moments where something felt off, but not enough to trigger the kind of intervention that might have changed everything. To most people, these were just routine incidents. Another call, another report, another name added to a system already overflowing. But behind those reports was a man drifting further and further away from reality. He was homeless, alone more often than not, and inside his mind, something was breaking. Family members would later describe his struggle with mental illness, saying he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a condition that, when untreated or poorly managed, can distort reality in ways that are almost impossible for others to fully understand. Voices that aren't there, thoughts that don't belong, a constant, unrelenting sense that something or someone is controlling you. Imagine living like that. Imagine waking up every day unsure of what's real and what isn't. Unsure if the world around you is safe or if it's slowly turning against you. Now imagine having no stable home, no consistent support, no one who can pull you back when your thoughts begin to spiral. That was the reality DeCarlos was living in, and it was getting worse. In March 2024, authorities had already documented at least 6 interactions with him. 6 separate moments where something wasn't right. 6 chances, depending on how you look at it, for someone to step in. But nothing changed. The system moved on. And so did he, until the calls started becoming more disturbing. At some point in 2025, DeCarlos made a 911 call that would later stand out as deeply unsettling. He was at Novant Presbyterian Hospital. And he wasn't asking for help in the way most people do. He told the operator that he needed assistance removing a man-made material that was controlling him. Think about that for a second. Not pain, not injury, not something visible, something inside him, something he believed had taken over. To the outside world, it might sound confusing, even bizarre, but to him, it was real, completely real. And that's what makes cases like this so complicated, because the danger doesn't always look like danger until it's too late. People experiencing severe mental illness can exist in a completely different version of reality. One where fear is constant. One where threats feel immediate and personal, even when no one else can see them. And when that reality collides with the real world, the results can be devastating. By the time August 2025 arrived, DeCarlos Brown Jr. was still moving through the city, unnoticed by most, misunderstood by many, and slipping further into a state that few around him truly grasped. Charlotte was alive that summer. Busy streets, late-night commuters, the steady rhythm of a city that never fully sleeps. The Lynx Blue Line was part of that rhythm. Every day, it carried people to work, to school, to home, to the lives they were building. On August 22nd, it carried something else, a moment that would shatter that sense of normalcy forever. Iryna Zarutska was just 23 years old. She had come to the United States from Ukraine, carrying with her the kind of hope that only comes from starting over. A new country, a new life, a future filled with possibilities. For many people, that journey alone takes courage, and to leave behind everything familiar, to step into the unknown, to believe that somewhere out there, things can be better. That was the path she was on. And on that night, she boarded the train like so many others had before her. There was nothing unusual about it. No warning signs, no sense that anything was about to go wrong. Just another ride. Just another moment in a life that was only beginning. Somewhere on that same train, DeCarlos Brown Jr. was there too. 2 lives. 2 completely different worlds. On a collision course that neither of them could fully understand. Not yet. What happened next would unfold quickly. Too quickly for anyone to fully process in the moment. But the tension, the shift, the feeling that something wasn't right. It was already there. Passengers would later describe a kind of unease, the kind you can't quite explain, the kind you try to ignore, because nothing has happened yet, because everything still looks normal on the surface. But beneath that surface, something was building, and in just a matter of moments, that quiet train ride would turn into a scene of fear, confusion, and irreversible tragedy. And when it was over, when the train finally came to a stop, when the reality of what had happened began to sink in, people would start asking questions, not just about that night, but about everything that led up to it. Who was this man? What went wrong? And the one question that would echo louder than all the others, why didn't anyone stop this before it happened? Because the truth is, this story didn't start on that train. It didn't start with Iryna. And it didn't start on August 22nd. And it started long before that. In quiet moments, in ignored warnings, in a system struggling to keep up with people slipping through its cracks. And now, those cracks had turned into something much bigger. Something that couldn't be ignored anymore. Something that had taken a life. And left behind a trail of questions that no one could easily answer. Because sometimes, the most terrifying stories aren't the ones that come out of nowhere. They're the ones that were slowly unfolding right in front of everyone. Until it was too late. The silence after a violent moment is never truly silent. It lingers. It clings to the air, to the walls, to the people who witnessed it, replaying itself over and over again in their minds, refusing to let go. And on that train, and when the seconds after everything changed, that silence was suffocating. At first, there was confusion. Passengers didn't immediately understand what they were seeing. It didn't register. The human mind has a way of rejecting sudden horror, of trying to rewrite reality into something safer, something more familiar. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's an argument. Maybe it will stop. But it didn't. Because what was happening wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. And it was unfolding right in front of them. Somewhere in that carriage, Iryna Zarutska had gone from being just another passenger to the center of something no one was prepared for. Fear is a strange thing. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it shrinks you. It pulls your body inward, makes you smaller, quieter, hoping somehow that danger will pass you by. Witnesses would later describe a moment, brief but unforgettable, where she curled in on herself, trying to protect what she could. It's a natural instinct, to shield, to survive, to hold on. But in situations like this, Survival isn't always in your control. DeCarlos Brown Jr. wasn't acting in a way that made sense to the people around him. There was no clear argument, no visible trigger, no moment where things escalated in a way people could follow. Just a sudden shift. And then, chaos. To the outside world, it looked like randomness, unpredictable, unexplainable. But inside his mind, it may have been something entirely different, something distorted, something overwhelming, something that to him felt real enough to act on. And that's what made the situation even more terrifying. Because how do you stop something you don't understand? How do you intervene in a moment that doesn't follow any logic you recognize? By the time people realized the seriousness of what was happening, it was already too late to prevent it. The train, once a place of routine and normalcy, had become a scene of panic. Voices raised, movement scattered. Some passengers froze, others reacted. And in those chaotic seconds, everything blurred together. Fear, confusion, disbelief. Moments like that don't unfold like they do in movies. There's no clear sequence, no perfect timing, just fragments. Broken pieces of memory that witnesses would later try to put together. Each one holding onto a different part of the same nightmare. Emergency responders were called. The train was stopped. And just like that, the outside world came rushing in. Flashing lights, sirens cutting through the night, officers moving quickly, trying to secure the scene, trying to understand what had happened, trying to regain control over something that had spiraled so suddenly out of it. But even as they did their jobs, even as procedures were followed, there was one truth that couldn't be changed. A young woman had lost her life, and nothing could undo that. In the hours that followed, the story began to spread. At first, it was just another breaking news alert, a brief headline, a notification on someone's phone. But as more details emerged, the weight of it became impossible to ignore. A 23-year-old woman, a public train, a violent, unexpected attack, and a suspect whose past was already raising serious questions. Our investigators moved quickly to identify and apprehend DeCarlos Brown Jr. He wasn't a stranger to the system. That much became clear almost immediately. His name appeared in records. His history began to surface. And with it came a growing sense of unease, not just about what he had done, but about what had been known before that night. People started asking, how does someone with multiple prior police interactions end up here? How does someone showing clear signs of mental distress remain in a position where something like this can happen? Were there missed opportunities? Missed warnings? Missed chances to intervene? These weren't easy questions, and they didn't have simple answers. Because the reality is, systems are complicated. Mental health care is complicated. And when those systems intersect with public safety, the lines between responsibility, capability, and limitation become blurred. As the investigation continued, more pieces of DeCarlos's past came into focus. The welfare checks, the 911 calls, the reports of unusual behavior. Each one, on its own, might not have seemed like enough, but together, they painted a picture of someone struggling, someone slipping, someone who, over time, had become increasingly disconnected from the world around him. Family members spoke about his mental illness, about his diagnosis, about the challenges he faced, and in doing so, they added another layer to the story, one that made it harder to look at things in simple terms of good and evil. Because this wasn't just about a crime, And it was about a person whose mind may not have been fully his own. A person navigating a reality that didn't match everyone else's, and a system that, for one reason or another, hadn't been able to stop the collision course he was on. But while those complexities mattered, while they needed to be understood, there was another truth that couldn't be overlooked. Iryna Zarutska was gone. And for her family, for the life she was building, none of those explanations would ever be enough. In the days that followed, the community felt the impact. Public transportation, something people rely on every day, suddenly felt different. Less safe, less certain. People looked around more, paid closer attention, wondered quietly who they were sharing space with, because that's what incidents like this do. And they change how you see the world, even if just a little, even if just for a moment. And as the legal process began to unfold, another twist emerged, one that would shift the focus of the case in a completely different direction. DeCarlos Brown Jr. was evaluated, not just as a suspect, but as a patient. And what that evaluation revealed would complicate everything that came next, because the question was no longer just about what he did, but whether he could even stand trial for it. And that's where this story takes another turn, one that moves away from the train, away from that night, and into a courtroom where justice, mental illness, and accountability collide in ways that are anything but straightforward. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't understanding what happened. It's deciding what happens next. And the courtroom doesn't feel like the train. There are no sudden movements, no confusion, no chaos. Everything here is controlled, measured, deliberate. But beneath that control, something else lingers. Tension. The kind that doesn't explode, but stretches, tight and heavy, as everyone waits for answers that may never feel complete. By the time DeCarlos Brown Jr. was brought into the legal system, the narrative had already begun to split into two very different directions. On one side, a brutal, undeniable act of violence. A young woman who had lost her life in a way no one could justify, no one could undo. On the other, a man whose mental state was now under intense scrutiny. Not just who he was, but what he was capable of understanding. Because in the eyes of the law, one question stood above all the others. Was he mentally capable of standing trial? It sounds simple on the surface, but it isn't. Because this isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about comprehension. About whether the person sitting in that courtroom can truly understand the charges against them, can assist in their own defense, can participate in the process that will decide their future. And when it comes to severe mental illness, that line becomes incredibly difficult to define. DeCarlos underwent a mental evaluation, not a quick assessment, not a surface-level observation, but a deeper look into his state of mind, how he thinks, how he processes reality, how he understands the world around him. And what came back from that evaluation would change the course of the case. And he was deemed incapable to proceed. Those three words carry weight, more than most people realize, because what they mean is this. At this moment in time, DeCarlos Brown Jr. does not have the mental capacity to stand trial. He cannot fully grasp the legal proceedings. He cannot effectively work with his attorneys. He cannot participate in his own defense in a meaningful way. And because of that, the trial cannot move forward. For some, that decision felt like a pause, a necessary step in a complicated process. But for others, it felt like something else entirely. like justice had been put on hold, like the system had taken a step back when it should have been moving forward. And that's where the debate begins, because cases like this don't just live in courtrooms, they live in public opinion, in conversations. Oh, in the quiet thoughts people have when they hear the details and try to make sense of them. Should someone who commits such a violent act be treated as a patient or a criminal? Can they be both? And if they are, which comes first? The situation became even more complicated when another detail came to light. DeCarlos wasn't just facing a state case. There was also a federal case, separate charges, separate proceedings, and most importantly, separate custody. He was being held in federal custody, which meant something critical for the state case. Any effort to restore his mental competency, any attempt to provide treatment that could bring him to a point where he could stand trial, was effectively stalled. His attorneys made that clear. They requested that a scheduled hearing be postponed, arguing that as long as he remained in federal custody, the process of restoring his capacity couldn't properly begin. And just like that, time stretched. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And the case slowed. Not because it wasn't important, not because it wasn't urgent, but because the system itself requires certain conditions to be met before it can move forward. And in this case, those conditions weren't there. For the family of Iryna Zarutska, this wasn't just a delay. It was another layer of pain, another reminder that the path to justice isn't always direct, that sometimes it winds through processes that feel distant, clinical, disconnected from the emotional reality of what was lost. Because while the court examines mental states and legal definitions, a family is left grieving, trying to reconcile the life their daughter had with the way it ended. And then there's the larger question, the one that extends beyond this single case. What happens when someone like DeCarlos Brown Jr. slips through the cracks? Because the signs were there, not hidden, not invisible. Documented interactions, repeated calls, moments where something was clearly wrong. And yet, nothing stopped the progression. Nothing altered the path in a way that prevented what would eventually happen. It's easy, after the fact, to look back and connect the dots, to see the pattern, to identify the moments that now feel like warnings. But in real time, those moments don't always stand out. They blend into the noise of everything else. Until one day, they don't. As the legal process continues, one thing remains uncertain. What does justice look like in a case like this? Is it a trial, a conviction, a sentence, or is it something else entirely? Treatment, containment, acknowledgement of a reality where the person responsible may not have been fully aware of their actions in the way we expect. There are no easy answers, only difficult truths. Because this case sits at the intersection of two systems that don't always align perfectly, the criminal justice system and the mental health system, each with its own rules, its own limitations, its own purpose. And when they collide, the result is rarely simple. Somewhere in all of this, the memory of that train ride remains, frozen in time, a moment that started like any other and ended in a way no one could have predicted. A reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself, that sometimes it builds quietly, slowly, until it reaches a point where it can no longer be contained. And now, as the case moves forward, slowly, uncertainly, shaped by factors that go far beyond that single night, one question continues to echo. not just in the courtroom, not just in the media, but in the minds of everyone who has followed this story from the beginning. If the signs were there, if the warnings existed, if the system had seen it clearly, would Iryna Zarutska still be alive today? Or was this tragedy already set in motion, long before anyone realized where it would lead? The question doesn't fade. It stays, long after the headlines slow down, long after the courtroom empties, long after the train itself returns to its routine, and carrying passengers who now sit just a little more alert than before. Could this have been stopped? As weeks turned into months, the case of DeCarlos Brown Jr. became something more than a single act of violence. It became a mirror, reflecting the cracks in systems that are meant to protect, to intervene, to recognize when someone is slipping beyond the point of control. Because by now, the pattern was undeniable. The police interactions, the 911 calls, the hospital visit where he spoke about something controlling him. Each moment on its own may not have been enough, but together, they told a story that was building toward something dangerous. And still, nothing stopped it. In legal terms, the process continued exactly as it was supposed to. The court acknowledged his mental state, but the ruling of incompetency remained in place. And the next step became clear: restoration. The possibility that, with treatment, DeCarlos Brown Jr. could one day regain the capacity to stand trial. But that possibility came with uncertainty, because restoration isn't guaranteed. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it takes years, years of waiting, years of questions without answers, years where justice feels like it's suspended in time. Meanwhile, the federal case added another layer of complexity. Different charges, different jurisdiction, a separate path running alongside the state case, influencing it, delaying it, complicating it. And at the center of it all, a man whose mind may never fully align with the reality the legal system requires. But while the system worked through its procedures, life outside the courtroom moved forward, and for some, moving forward felt impossible. Iryna Zarutska's story didn't end on that train. It couldn't, because she wasn't just a name in a report. She was a person, a daughter, a young woman who had crossed borders, left behind familiarity, and stepped into a new country with hope in her hands. That kind of courage doesn't disappear. It leaves an impact in the people who knew her, in the community that began to learn her name, in the quiet spaces where her absence is now felt the most. There's something deeply unsettling about the randomness of it all. She didn't choose that moment. She didn't see it coming. There was no connection, no warning, no reason she could have understood. Just a place, a time, and a man whose reality had drifted too far from everyone else's. And maybe that's the hardest part to accept. That sometimes tragedy doesn't come with a clear explanation. That sometimes it exists in the space between what we understand and what we don't. As the months passed, conversations around the case began to shift. Less about the shock of what happened, and more about what it means. About mental health systems that struggle to keep up. About public safety in shared spaces. About the difficult balance between compassion and accountability. Because it's easy to ask for justice. But in cases like this, justice isn't simple. What does it mean to hold someone accountable if they didn't fully understand their actions? What does it mean to protect the public if the warning signs don't trigger intervention soon enough? What does it mean for families who are left behind, waiting for a resolution that may never feel complete. There are no clean answers, only perspectives, and each one carries its own weight. At some point, the train where it all happened returned to service. It had to. Cities don't stop. They adjust. They absorb. They move forward. Passengers stepped on board again, sat in the same seats, heard the same announcements, watched the same doors open and close. But something was different. Because once a place becomes the site of something tragic, it never fully goes back to what it was. There's always a memory attached to it, an invisible imprint. For those who were there that night, that imprint is permanent. A moment that replays without warning. A sound, a movement, a feeling they can't quite shake. For others, it's a story they heard. A reminder that danger doesn't always look like danger. That sometimes it sits quietly, right beside you. And somewhere, behind all the legal proceedings and public discussions, the central truth remains unchanged. A life was lost, and nothing can bring it back. As for DeCarlos Brown Jr., his future remains uncertain. If his mental state improves, he could eventually stand trial. If it doesn't, he may remain in treatment indefinitely. Either way, the outcome will never erase what happened. It will only define how the system responds to it. And maybe that's where this story finally settles. Not in a courtroom verdict, not in a final headline, but in a question that doesn't have a clear ending. Because this wasn't just about one night, or one train, or one moment of violence, and it was about everything that led up to it. Everything that was missed. Everything that might have made a difference. And as the city of Charlotte continues to move forward, as trains continue to run, as people continue to sit across from strangers, trusting the quiet normalcy of everyday life, that question still lingers, just beneath the surface, unanswered, unresolved, uncomfortable. If someone had stepped in earlier, if the signs had been taken differently, if help had reached him in time, would Iryna Zarutska still be here? Or was this tragedy already written? In the silence of all those moments, when something was clearly wrong, and nothing changed. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.